Welcome to the eXtremeRate YouTube channel. In this video, we will show you how to do the full housing shell swap on the DualSense Edge controller, and transform it to the transparent style as an example. First, let's check out all the needed tools and replacement parts inside the box. After confirming we got all the components, let's start the process. First, we need to take apart the Edge controller. Let's start with removing the back buttons. Then put the larch to the side until the cover is released. Remove the cover and put it aside. Next, we need to remove the back panel. Use the prying tool to pry along the edge from the front to the back. Please be careful and not to hurt yourself when prying the panel. After the panel is unclipped, remove the panel and put it aside. There is the latch part with a tension spring at the bottom of the controller. Grab the plastic part and remove the spring. Next, let's remove the joystick modules. Raise the release lever and the module would slide out of the slot. Just remove and put them aside. Now pry the L1 and R1 buttons and remove them. Then remove the screws on the shoulder buttons. As we can see, there are 9 screws locking the back housing. Now we need to remove all these screws. After the screws are removed, separate and detach the controller housing from the middle. Since the back housing is still hooked to the controller, we can wiggle it to make it release from the controller. Unplug and remove the battery. Now use the tweezers to unhook the wires of the vibration module before removing the adaptive trigger. Gently clip the wires and pull them out of the hook. Then remove the 2 screws holding the adaptive trigger. After the screws are removed, carefully flip the trigger over, unplug the ribbon connecting the motherboard, and remove the adaptive trigger. Now do the same to the other side. Carefully pull the wires out of the hook with the tweezers. And then remove the 2 screws holding the adaptive trigger. After the screws are removed, carefully flip the trigger over, unplug the ribbon connecting the motherboard, and remove the adaptive trigger. Next, carefully disconnect the ribbon cables of the back button module and the microphone. Carefully remove the back microphone. Then disconnect the wires of the vibration module on the left and right. Then remove these 3 screws that secure the middle bracket. After the screws are removed, carefully grab the whole piece of the board and separate the plastic bracket. Next, let's move to the main board. First, disconnect the ribbon cable connecting the main board. Then remove the main board from the controller housing. Use the tweezers to remove the mute buttons. Then remove the 5 screws that secure the front panel. After the screws are removed, separate the motherboard frame and release it from the front panel. Be careful not to damage the ribbon cable. Then carefully remove 2 tiny springs beside the logo button. Remove the Create button and the Option button. Then remove the screws and release the right lever attached to the front panel. And remove the button pad, the action buttons, and the rubber on the right panel. Next, remove the screws and release the left lever attached to the front panel. And remove the button pad, the direction buttons, and the rubber on the left panel. Next, let's move to the touchpad. Remove the last screws to release the touchpad. After the screws are removed, use the prying tool to pry the front plate, and the touchpad will pop out. Then carefully release the touchpad from the bracket and don't rip the ribbon. Disconnect the ribbon. Next, let's use the hot gun or hair dryer to heat the touchpad with a temperature of 60 to 80 Celsius degrees. Heat the touchpad for a while, like 1 to 2 minutes, to soften the adhesive on its back. Then pry the touchpad board to release it from the original plate. This may be sticky, just lift it up with some force to separate it. Since the touchpad is removed, next we will assemble all the parts to the new housing. First, install the board on the touchpad of the full housing kit. Please align and fit the board on the touchpad. Then reconnect the ribbon cable. We can press the board to better fit it to the touchpad plate. Then install the touchpad to the panel frame. Put the ribbon through the gap, and then attach the touchpad to the bracket. Then assemble the separated front panels as an integration. First, let's install the right panel. Install the rubber pad to the action button. Then attach the middle part to the right panel. Then install the lever part to the panel. Please check and make sure to get the right one. Lock the screw to secure the lever on the panel. Then let's install the left panel. First, attach and secure the panel to the middle part. Then install the left lever on the panel and lock the screw. Next, install the action buttons in the corresponding place. And install the button pad. Make sure it fits the buttons. Then install the D-pad buttons. And install the button pad and make sure it fits the button. Next, install the Create button and the Option button. Put back two tiny springs beside the logo button. And lock the two screws on the touchpad frame. Then remove the original logo button and install the one in the kit. Now align and install the mainboard frame to the front panel. Get the ribbon through the gap and fit the frame to the panel. Then lock the three screws to secure the frame to the controller. And lock the two upper screws on the touchpad bracket. Then install the mute button on the controller. and install the mainboard to the controller. Please make sure the microphone cable not to be clipped by the mainboard. Reconnect the ribbon to the mainboard. Reattach the microphone cable. And check from the top to the bottom to see if all the parts line up together. Next, let's install the joystick module to the controller. Lock the 2 screws to secure the joystick module. Reconnect the wire of the vibration module on both sides. And reattach both joystick ribbon cables and install the microphone. Then let's replace the trigger button. To replace the trigger button, we need to take apart the trigger to get the original button off. First, remove the 3 screws on the side of the trigger. And then remove the 2 screws on the other side. Remove the plastic covers on both sides of the trigger. And remove the metal rod locking the trigger button. Then remove the trigger button. Since we still need the bracket inside, so we need to separate it from the button. First, insert the spudger into one side of the button and pry with some force to unclip the buckle off the bracket. Please be gentle and careful not to hurt yourself. Then unclip the buckle of the other side. Now the bracket comes off. We need to install it to the button in the kit. Install the bracket to the button slot and clip it in. Then install the button on the trigger. Clip both parts to each other and fit them together. Reinstall the metal rod to secure the button on the trigger. Then put back the cover on the trigger. Make sure the first tooth of the cover fits the first tooth of the gear. We can rotate the gear and check if all the teeth fit and work properly. Then install the upper cover on the gear, and lock the 3 screws on the cover. Install the cover on the other side, and lock the screws on the cover. After all the parts of the trigger are settled, let's install the trigger to the controller. Reconnect the trigger ribbon to the main board. And then fit the trigger right into the place. Then lock back the screws on the trigger module to secure it onto the controller. Next, let's replace the trigger button on the right trigger. First, remove the 3 screws on the side of the trigger. And then remove the 2 screws on the other side. Remove the plastic covers on both sides of the trigger. And remove the metal rod locking the trigger button. Then remove the trigger button, since we still need the bracket inside. So we need to separate it from the button. First, insert the spudger into one side of the button and pry with some force to unclip the buckle off the bracket. Please be gentle and careful not to hurt yourself. Then unclip the buckle of the other side. Now the bracket comes off, we need to install it to the button in the kit. Install the bracket to the button slot and clip it in. Then install the button on the trigger. Install and make sure the spring is correctly placed. Clip both parts to each other and fit them together. Then put back the cover on the trigger. Make sure the first tooth of the cover fits the first tooth of the gear. Reinstall the metal rod to secure the button on the trigger. Then install the upper cover on the gear, and lock the 3 screws on the cover. Install the cover on the other side, and lock the screws on the cover. After all the parts of the trigger are settled, let's install the trigger to the controller. Reconnect the trigger ribbon to the main board. And then fit the trigger right into the place. Then lock back the screws on the trigger module to secure it onto the controller. Next, let's reconnect the battery cable and install the battery onto the controller. Then let's move to the back housing part. First, install the trim bar on the upper part of the housing. Secure the bar by locking the middle screw. Then use the PET sheets in the kit and stick them to the L2 and our 2-stop sliders. Slightly bend the sheet and fit it to the correct place. Then bend another sheet and place it on the other side. After the 2 upper sheets are placed, next we need to place the longer sheet on the block of the slider. Take one piece of the sheet and place it on the shell where the notches match each other. And make the end of the longer sheet placed underneath the shorter one. Then slide the sheet and check if it works properly and slide it to the top. Next, take another piece of the longer sheet and place it on the other side where the notches match each other. And make the end of the longer sheet placed underneath the shorter one and slide it to the top. Now slide the L2 and our 2-stop slider to the top. And then install the back housing to the controller. Fit the housing and press to clip in place. Then lock all the screws on the back housing. After all the screws of the back housing are secured, we need to install the latch part to the controller. First, hook one end of the tension spring to the latch bar. Then hook the other end of the spring to the controller and install the whole part to the controller. Slide and check if the latch part works. Now install the back panel to the controller. Align and fit the panel to the housing and clip it in place. Press all the parts of the panel and make sure it is well clipped. Then install the joysticks to the controller and lock the levers. Then put back the front cover. And lock the screws on the shoulder buttons. In the last, let's install the shoulder buttons to finish the process of the full housing swap on the DualSense Edge controller. Thanks for watching the video, and we hope you enjoy the customizing journey with eXtremeRate.